Good evening, and really, really grateful just to have been invited to have this conversation with incredibly talented filmmakers about a really, really poignant and beautiful film. Will I See You Again, written by Michael Perez-Lindsey and Rhett Lindsey, and directed by Michael Perez-Lindsey. I have to say, I was really moved by this film. I was raised in the South. I was raised in the church, grew up in the church, and the conversations that happen in the church around manhood and love and Christianity, they're beautiful conversations, and sometimes they're really complicated. And I really appreciated just how subtle and graceful this film was in peeling back those layers. And so I'm really just excited to get into the conversation. I'm not going to hold us up too long. And I'm just going to introduce you all. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce director Michael Perez-Lindsey, writers Rhett Lindsey and Michael Perez-Lindsey, and actor and executive producer Hosea Chanchez,
How you guys doing?
and executive producers Academy Award winner Travon Free,
Hey everybody.
Academy Award winner Martin Desmond Rowe,
Hi guys.
Mickey Meyer,
Everybody?
and the very talented DeWanda Wise.
Very kind. Hey everybody.
And of course, EP, the one and only Mr. Nicholas May.
Hello, all.
Awesome. Let's just jump right in. So I'd like to start with Michael and Rhett. You're married, and you've created some pretty powerful work together. And that work feels really personal to me when I watch it. Can you just talk about the genesis of this project? At what point did you all decide like, this is a story that needs to be told right now?
Yeah, well, I felt like there's a universal theme, Kevin, when it comes to like loss and regret, and a common denominator within that is people not having the courage to speak their truth. And that's something that's always like followed me just in my own personal life. And this story was really inspired by my own experiences in college with past love that I had. And it was
Mm,
really infected by outside perspectives and cultural expectations and societal pressures that really did push us apart, to where we haven't had a chance to have a conversation because of the climate of what's expected from our cultures and from the expectations that are set upon us from our families. And so that's where this really stood from. I was really inspired by what it would be like if two people didn't have the courage necessarily to confront each other, but there was a conduit, this device that could act as its own character to bring these people together to really express their truths, not only for themselves, but for each other, because that's where lies the truth of finding closure. And hopefully that can be a positive thing, and it could also probably be a negative thing, but it's the pursuit of finding it. And sometimes we need that extra push when we don't have the courage ourselves. So that's what inspired me to write it. And we did that in October of last year. Michael came to me and was like, "Hey man, I want you to write a story. We've always talked about wanting to collaborate on a project." And it just came. It came instantly. And I wrote the story out, and then he read it and loved it. And then he said, "Yo, I want you to write a first draft and let's make this a script." And I did that. And then we collaborated further on the drafts of the script until we got to a place where we felt like we had a solid shooting draft to really make this a reality and bring it to fruition.
mm, mm. I'm curious about the relationship between Jim, Paul, and Palmer. And at what point did you all develop those characters in that relationship? Because there's so much that's happening in that relationship, that's
Mm-hmm.
impacting the relationship of the living between Paul and Palmer. I'm just curious at what point did you decide like this is the way that I'm going to tell this story between these three characters?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Michael.
well, for specifically for Max Palmer and Paul Jensen, these two, we wanted to present them as if you could feel the history between these two men, and everything that took place happened without saying anything, and the interactions that they have between the communal people in the short, whether it's Claire or Barbara, these are all figures that you can feel the history between them. And our main thing was making sure that anyone that Max Palmer interacted with was a support system. There was a level of empathy that was placed upon this character who's dealing with this inner turmoil, this conflict that he has. And we wanted to make sure that Jim, as this third party who's no longer present, still exists between the two men. And that's come back to our title, Will I See You Again? There's multiple layers to that meaning. Not only will I see you again on the other side when you think of a religious standpoint, but will I see myself again? Will I see you? I haven't seen you in 20 years. So yeah, everyone when they were crafted in terms of the characters, we wanted to make sure that the audience could see this unspoken relationship that is much more than skin deep. And a lot of people have given us wonderful feedback that these archetypes, they've felt like they've existed in their own lives, or they've seen themselves within the characters as well.
As a filmmaker, I'm always thinking about cinematic real estate, and that you really don't have a lot of time to really grab an audience. In this film, you all do it immediately with 3 words. As soon as the film starts: fear, rejection, and acceptance. I'm curious what the thinking was behind that, behind bringing us in on those really powerful words. And Hosea, you can kind of speak to this as well, since you're the one who delivered them. But first, I'd love to hear from Michael and Rhett just about what went into the just conception of that and bringing us in that way.
Yeah, those 3 words, those always follow my life. I think fear, rejection, and acceptance are things that are universal for everyone in any facet of how they're moving through their journey in life. And from a religious standpoint, with Max Palmer being a pastor, being a figure that people look up to as a Black man in this congregation, giving a sermon at his friend's memorial on a Sunday service, it felt like that should be the catalyst that brings us onto this journey, because those 3 words really do affect how we operate in our lives through fear, rejection, and it's just really felt like a powerful way to start the narrative.
Yeah, it was definitely a launch pad for the main themes of the story and the central pillars of what the conflict is within this main character, and not just for Max Palmer, but for our other character, Paul Jensen, as well. And you see them sprinkled, those concepts sprinkled within all the other supporting archetypes in it as well: acceptance and fear and rejection. It's the universal experiences that we all have. And so, what better way to just right out the gate say this is the story and cap it with a resolution within those conflicts.
And to piggyback right off of that, I really I didn't know how universal those 3 words were until we got to work together. And we had a lot of commonalities in our lives as men and men of color. And those 3 words, as he said, they resonate so well with all of us. I think all of humanity can identify with that. And I always look for in works words and moments that can connect us, because there's far more that connects us than separates us in our lives. So for me, that was when I knew that I was about to be on a really good ride, when I read that.
Beautiful, beautiful. Michael, there's a really organic tension that's being built, especially in the first 3 minutes of the film, between Paul and Palmer. I'm curious about just your directorial approach to that. And I'm also curious, like, what did you say? What was the character work you were doing with Hosea? And you have to remind me the character, the actor who portrays Paul. What is his name?
Nick Wexler.
With Nick and
Wexler
Hosea, what was the character work you were doing with Nick and Hosea? Because the moment is so subtle. They're just very, very small, gentle looks, but it expresses so much. So I'm just curious about that.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I'm a big advocate for mental health and therapy. Everyone should definitely explore that in their life. It's a wonderful thing. But I brought a lot of those tools that I learned in my own personal therapy journey to give a framework for both Hosea and Nick, to describe to them how they're triggered and why they're triggered. And my husband and I, we wrote lengthy backstories for each character. So, Hosea and I and Nick and I, we'd have conversations separately prior to filming. And then on the day we did a rehearsal. And then we did a rehearsal in the space of the church. So the church was very, very, they blessed us with that opportunity. So we could really feel what that was going to be like. And yeah, all those moments they're very subtle, because those are the moments that in our own lives where all that deep emotion happens, we try to contain physically what our body is feeling on the inside. So that was kind of like the that was my approach to putting them in a headspace when Paul walks through that door and Max is at the pulpit, and giving them that space of, it's been 20 years, this is what happens. And it's this rush of trauma that comes back. And your 20 years is might as well have been 2 seconds ago. So it gave them the framework. And then from there, I mean, Hosea and Nick are phenomenal. The whole cast was great, but I felt so blessed because it was like working in a playground, and I had these incredible artists to bring and elevate this visually, and their performances just they took it to another level.
Well, Mike, you're really too kind, brother. But I will say your style of directing, you really made me feel very comfortable out the gate. And that's really important from an actor to a director. So those unspoken words for me were the things that I really resonated with the most, because I think we can all identify with not being able to really articulate ourselves fully when we meet someone or go back to a situation or a relationship that we've had in our lives. So for me, those unspoken words are the loudest things. And I was so happy when we got to work together and rehearse a little bit. And Mike celebrated those quiet, subtle moments too, because for me, those moments were bigger than the words he said, because he's a closeted man. So I knew that those silent moments, the small touches, the looks, the heartbeat of what the character is going through is really important for this character.
Yeah, I really appreciated that approach, just because, it would be easy for a director or actor to create a moment where they're all, they're screaming out at each other and they're yelling and, clashing. But the subtle restraint, just kind of like internal, moment that you brought to that, I think is really strong. And it really makes it more powerful than it would otherwise, So kudos to you on that. I want to jump to this interaction between Claire and Palmer in the church. Claire says, "It's been 20 years, all that held in. That's your stage 4." That is a powerful, powerful line. And it feels personal. And I'm just curious about what that moment means to you all, to Hosea, to EPs, to Michael and to Rhett. Like, what does that moment in particular mean in the larger context of the film, and then beyond the film? What does that moment mean?
Yeah, I can start it off. So, just to give you all a little bit of a backstory, my friend DeWanda Wise, who's the executive producer on our film, she really helped inspire me to write the character of Claire, because Claire is someone that has strength. Claire is someone who really holds space for people. She's a pillar. She's someone that people can anchor to. And for her to use that line, I really wanted to have an intimacy that is platonic between these two people, but still feels very close, where she can see Max Palmer for who he is and check him in a way that's not criticizing, check him in a way where it's reminding him of the bigger picture, that life is too short. And to do it in a setting where she's lost her love, she's saying goodbye to her love with a memorial service. I felt like that would just be a beautiful thing. And so really, again, it was just taking different energies that I experienced. And like I said, DeWanda, just her energy, her spirit, her strength as a woman, it really inspired me to make the mold of who Claire is, the character. So that's what started that whole journey of me creating that character.
And I'll jump in too. For me, that specific line was what gave my character permission. So had she not been the type of woman that she was, and their relationship, their backstory, Mike and I talked a lot about the backstory into why what she says would trigger him to open up and to release some things within himself. So had that not been there, it would have been a lot more difficult for me to achieve moving forward. It would have been a roadblock for the character, because he would have still existed within his own thoughts of the past. So that was the line that freed him in a way for me.
And I think I felt that. I had this conversation recently with someone about small aside, about the pandemic, and how, very early on, people were doing that thing where they were hierarchizing agonies and pain, right? And we do that a lot. We do that a lot. And so that moment, is exactly as Hosea just said. It was like, even in her grief, giving someone else to permission to acknowledge their pain, whether it's capital P pain or lowercase p pain, it's like it's inconsequential because how it impacts someone's life, how it impacts their bodies, how it impacts like how they move through the world, their relationships, all that is like deeply consequential, and I think what you were referencing, the start of this like film, this beautiful short. I love this short so much.
Yeah, yeah.
You could feel it. You can feel his pain. You could feel his history. And that there's pain in that room that goes beyond the grief of losing someone. And you can feel that from the first beat. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that line, I think I remember watching it and just going like, whew.
Yeah, me
Yeah.
too. Me too. There's another moment too that I wanted to talk about, which is like halfway through the film. Barbara tells Palmer, "I see you just as you are, and that's enough." Um, just as she encourages Jim, just as she encourages him to use the moment that Jim has given he and Paul. That's a really powerful moment in the film for me, just because as someone who grew up in the church, that conversation isn't happening like that very often, at least the church I was growing up in. So I'm curious, if there was a moment in your, growing up where where you experienced that, or if not, what led to you creating this moment? Because it was a really intimate and beautiful moment that is incredibly unique. And so I'm just curious
Yeah.
about it.
No, okay, but I appreciate you acknowledging that. That's one of my most favorite parts of the film, because for me, when I wrote that moment, I was reflecting on what I wish I would have heard as a Black young
Mm,
kid, young man, figuring out who I am and trying to find my place of being accepted in my community. I grew up in the church. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I was raised by a single mother. And, I will admit my mom was ignorant early on about, same-sex attraction and how that doesn't align necessarily with, Christian religion. And to have, again, we wanted to have women as like safety nets, as pillars and support for these men in this film. And to have Barbara, who was a member of the congregation, to acknowledge to her pastor, who's her leader, who she looks at for guidance, spirituality guidance, for her to give him that moment in this time where she is not sure what's about to transpire, but she wants him to feel like he has a safe space to go through the journey without judgment. That's just something that I think a lot of people from my community would really wish that we could hear from our elders, from people that we look up to within our church community, within just our cultural community, as it relates to just higher figures. And so creating that moment with Barbara and Max was crucial for anybody that's questioning their sexuality or questioning their attractions, to just to have that like acceptance of you're okay and I see you as you are, and that's enough. And sometimes you really need to hear that, to have that reassurance that I'm not I'm not strange. I'm seen, and that means a lot for me.
Yeah, to piggyback off that, that was a pivotal moment in the story to hear that from a mother-like figure, matriarchal-like figure who has a presence in the community, and it just we've gotten wonderful. We've had wonderful experiences of feedback with people who watch that, and they talk about that moment because when we were writing that, we wanted to make sure that some things you just have to just say because people they want to hear that. It helps them in the healing process. You're not getting it in real life. We live in a world where people they just can't say the most simple things, and those kind of things will linger with us and they shape us, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing in terms of like trauma. And we wanted to make sure that this character just spit it out and said what a lot of queer people, myself included, have always wanted to hear from that type of figure in their life.
mm, mm, mm.
I also feel like it gave the character permission as we are discussing now, it really gave him permission to move forward, which is something that I believe the layers needed to be there in order for a guy who was married to a woman and to live his life the way he did prior to these moments that his life is shape-shifting in. But it really allowed the audience and the characters to realize this is nothing malicious. It's not intentional. This is who you are. So it's almost like she gave him permission to peel back a layer of his life's onion. And what that did was gave him permission to live his authentic self. And so it didn't feel so much like he was a closeted man, living his life inauthentically to me. And those are the moments that allowed it to be, I feel like.
And one thing too, Kevin, with what Hosea said, we intentionally did not label anyone a sexual identity, gay, straight, queer, bisexual, because sometimes you don't know what your label is. And I think from the preference of the character of Max, just because he was married to a woman and was on that journey doesn't mean that he identifies as gay. Just because he had a past with Paul or bisexual, and I wanted that to really be really known from the film, is that sometimes having a label doesn't necessarily fit the person, and sometimes it does fit the person. But when people are on a journey of discovery, when they try to put themselves in a label because that's expected, that might not be right for them. And so I really want to make sure that we didn't have this idea of what people are, rather than let them just be who they are.
Right, right.
We didn't even have that conversation, but that's kind of how I got here as an EP too. I mean, anyone who pays any attention to any character I've played, they're all labelless queer people of color. That is, it's a very quiet agenda of mine, if there's an agenda to be had. But I'm just so ravenous for complicated stories. I feel like in recent years, Hollywood has done a good job of like more inclusiveness, but we're still very much well in like queer bestie territory. And, in a very subtle, moving, well done, extraordinary way, this this film for me is just adding to the lexicon of complicated, indescribable, wordless, labelless, like allowing people to continue to be themselves, even if that comes without, you know what I mean, a category.
Absolutely. Talking about that moment during the polygraph test when Paul asks Max if he'd ever messed around with another guy, with another man since they've been together. And Max gives this really subtle look toward Barbara.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what the directorial choices were around that particular look. It's so subtle, but it says so much. And I'm curious what it just means in the larger context of like queer people's relationships in the church, and the Black church in particular, because that's this experience. That's the kind of church I grew up in. So I'm just curious what went into that moment.
Yeah, well, it's such a complex moment because the first veil is being lifted, and now, even though Max Palmer's character has been given permission to be more comfortable in this very like vulnerable position, he Paul just goes for it, and you have this figure in the community who knows Max very well, and so it's this extreme moment of vulnerability, but it's kind of like a childlike reaction of making sure that you said I'm okay, am I? So he turns and slightly looks to Barbara, and Barbara gives her, and I talked to Anna Maria Horsford, who's phenomenal. She's just such a joy to work with. She fully understood what that moment was. Just the slightest grin, the slightest smile of safety and reassurance is given to Max in that moment. And from there, that's kind of like the first layer that comes off of Max's character, because that's kind of the elephant in the room for both of them. And Barbara, a lot of people have thought that Barbara already knew, and a lot of times that is true in real life. And so Anna and I had that discussion as well. Especially maternal figures in our life can sense when there is a energy difference. I know from my own experience growing up, my mother knew. A lot of my female mother-like figures, cousins, aunts, they knew. They know when there's something slightly different. And so we wanted to again position this character so there's nothing but affirmations of safety, security, and just giving him the agency to be himself in this very unique position.
Let me just say this in the meantime, too. For me, that was the moment where not only was he reinforced, but so many times personally in my life, I've always leaned on Black women to help me be my best, always. My mother was a single mom when I grew up. So for me, women have always been a safe space and a soft spot for me. So for me, as an actor, I use that moment as her holding my hand, like a spiritual handhold in a way that gave him the not only permission, but it made him brave so he could actually, be authentic in the end. Because I don't think for me, he wasn't really brave in those moments until the very end when he got to really express what he felt about what he felt about Paul. Sorry, forgive me. So that was the moment that he was able to be brave. But up until then, I used a lot of the surroundings to hold my hand. And in that moment, Barbara was one of the things that I used to hold his hand to be brave in the end.
I thought it was a beautiful moment because for me, growing up in the church, being bi, growing up in Compton, and having such a complex dynamic relationship with Black women, both in my family, my mother, my grandmother, the cousins I grew up with, Black women I dated, and then a second stage of my life where I was out and Black women had a very different reaction to that piece of information. And so it was nice to see that thing that I wanted at a certain point in my life, because for a large portion of my 20s, it was a very tumultuous experience to feel like, oh my, like I love these people, I love Black women, and yet they don't love me in my fullness. They don't love all of me unless they don't know something about me, right? And so it was like at this stage of my life, like my girlfriend's Black, and it's not it's the kind of thing where I got to a place where I grew emotionally past the fear of rejection in that way. And so in that moment, it was a really touching thing to see the desire play out, even if it's something that you didn't experience, but to see it presented in a way where some young Black boy or girl somewhere will see something like that and it'll have a different effect on the outcome of their lives or their journey.
Mr. Maye?
Yeah, to piggyback off of I guess kind of what everybody's saying, what I think is the film did a great exploration of feelings and different emotions. And it explored them in a way that isn't not in your face isn't the right phrase, but it's very honest and earnest. And I think that the film to me is a Black woman. It acts as a pathway to protection for individuals who feel like this and are going through the same type of emotions and thoughts and feelings. Humans are very complex individuals, and often, although I'm an ally and not of the community, when I watch, friends who are dealing with some of this stuff and just it's a lot. And I think the film does a good job of conveying that, humans aren't just one way. People aren't going to react to one thing one way. So when I think of this film, I think of it as like a bulletproof vest. But just hearing, DeWanda and Travon and Hosea just talk, I'm like, oh, the film is a Black woman. And all of us at some point are protected by a Black woman, whether we are seeking that protection or not. Um, and just I did want to comment on the stage 4 line. I thought it was such a clever line that stuck out to me instantaneously. And usually people save those kind of punchlines to the end, right? Because they're so good. But I think that did a good job of laying the foundation of what we're discussing now. That was kind of her way of saying it's okay to let it go, as people do when they have stage 4. That's kind of when, the white cloth is pulled back and you can reveal whatever and have no worry. And so I thought that was a very clever um, phrase, but also just a good point to put in the film, because kind of pulls that layer back, and then you walk into the rest of the film kind of open-minded and wondering what is going to transpire after a statement that's so bold like that is made. And so, yeah, I thought it was. Those are my thoughts on that. But just wanted to piggyback on what Travon said. Go ahead, Martin.
Been fascinating hearing all this to me. I really appreciate the candor and honesty, and yeah, I've learned a lot today, I feel. And I obviously I don't feel qualified to talk on the things that you guys have been talking about, and it's been a really interesting thing for me. But what I do feel qualified to talk about is just the quality of the film and the filmmaking and the performances. And, I've made a lot of short films, and I think I'm going to say I've probably watched more short films than most people alive. I think I can claim that. And, what makes a genius short, in my opinion, a good short is never a crushed down story. It's never something that really wishes it could be 80, 90, 120 minutes. It's always something with a very clever concept, right? And what this one does, often they're funny, right? Because they feel like a punchline thing, right? But what this thing does so beautifully is it has this somewhat high concept sort of setting. I won't spoil it for people who haven't seen it yet, but it's got a very interesting kind of high concept take, but you don't really notice it. It doesn't really present as that way. The performances, gentlemen, are flawless. Like, I was completely pulled in. I I adored watching the history fall out of you, and learning so much about what these characters have been through without it was the between lines that really got me. Like, I loved all the lines that have been quoted here, but honestly, what pulled me in was those moments between, with the inability to talk, the stutters and pauses before the revelations. Like, the quality of the performances was absolutely first rate, and the writing as well. There was this very clever structure, but then on top of that was, or inside that rather, was placed very human, very naturalistic dialogue that, like, somebody said, pulled me in almost exactly from the start. I was like, oh, these characters are real. This is interesting. Like, I'm the way when something presents itself really confidently, you just surrender to it. You have your little, especially when you watch a short, you have your little, like, oh, where am I going to pin this thing? How much am I going to lean in? And I leaned in immediately, and I was rewarded for it. So congratulations to you, and honestly, thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Brett, do I have
Thank
time
you.
for another question?
I think so. Just one more, and yeah,
Okay.
wrap it up.
Well, this one I'll pose to everyone then. I'm just curious um, about you all's view on the role of an artist in general, but specifically a filmmaker in this political and social climate that we're in right now, and the one that we're approaching. What does it mean to be an artist right now? What is our responsibility as artists and filmmakers in this time that we're living in? And we're buckling up for a crazy ride, right? What
Yeah.
should we as artists be doing with this time that we have and this skill that we have?
Yeah, I think
I'll start, or you start, Mike.
Oh yeah. Oh no, go ahead, Hosea. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's very simple. I think the artist's job is the same as the human's job, to tell the truth, to uphold the truth. The truth is the thing that every single person on this line and who will be watching this is up against. We have to maintain the honesty and the authenticity of what it means to be human. And I think that's the artist's job, as we all know. in our work to let our work represent real life. But I think it's imperative that we stick to and that we seek the truth in all situations in our lives and in stories that we tell.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. Guess it's better.
I like to lean on Tony Bambero's quote, the role of the artist is to make revolution irresistible. And now more than ever, our work has been laid out in front of us, and we have to be as open and creative and as inspiring and revolutionary over the next 4 years, than we've probably ever been in our lives. So it's a mantle that I take up proudly, and I think I'm always proud to be a part of an artistic and filmmaking community.
I would just say I've been fortunate to be a part of a lot of different short films, and to Martin's points earlier, they're very hard. It's a really hard thing to do, and I think, this is why shorts exist, is because there are stories that need to be told that may not make its way all the way through a very kind of archaic studio system at times, that need to be told. And to what Travon was saying, people need the representation of different points of view that they haven't seen and perspectives that they haven't seen. I am a straight white male that did not grow up in a Black church. And like, there's value in me watching this, there's value in me seeing something that I did not experience growing up. And that, to me, that is the unfortunate plight of the artist. And that is the responsibility of the artist, is to find the way to tell these stories by any means possible, and to gather people and to build momentum and to let that momentum shine and let that be the way that people consume stories as we're meant to do as humans. And so this short embodies what it means to be an artist to me.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to say, as a closing, just thank you to everyone that's on this call for being part of this tribe that my husband and I have created. To know that we as artists can have an idea and see it go all the way through fruition, to be an actual living thing. It's just a very wholesome and amazing experience. So I want to thank you all for just championing us. I want to thank you all for inspiring us and believing in us and giving us a voice to expand our voice, and to reach as many people as we can. So just thank you again for just really, really standing behind this film and for giving us the opportunity to expand the voices of people that are underrepresented. It truly means a lot.
Yeah. And once again, thank you all for inviting me to this conversation. I said it before and I'll say it again. This was an incredibly powerful film, and it's a film I really think everyone should see. And any way that I can support the journey, I've got your back, and please just let me know. And thank you all again for just a lovely conversation.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, everybody, so much.
Thank you, everyone.